Philosophers have tried to study history and find out if there's a pattern involved, if it has a direction or a purpose or any meaning for different events. And if you look at philosophy books, they are all looking forward on these things. Father's not a historian. He has, because of his connection with God, has had to go back and relive all aspects of history. As he says in the Peace Messages, his life has reconstituted the recreation of humanity. And you can imagine that Father went through everything that Adam went through, and everything Noah went through, everything Abraham went through, etc., all the way up to the history. And whenever he encountered a mistake, he was able to correct that. So in a very real sense, Father incarnates all of human history, past, present, and future. In that sense, almost he's more than human. But he has relived this, and his teaching is to show us how we can get back to God. That's the main thing. I'm not going to cover every detail because we have a lot, but I hope to be able to convey to you the essence of it. As we know, because of the fall, the ideal of God was not realized, and we came under the jurisdiction of the providence of restoration to indemnity. We're no longer under principle of creation, but restoration to indemnity. And that means that we are not free to think or feel or act as we want to, but we need to think and feel and act in certain ways which God has prescribed. Because the whole purpose of history is to receive the Messiah, but to do that, we fallen people have to build a foundation for the Messiah. And to do those things, we have to think and feel and act in certain ways. And as Father points out, whenever a central figure in history tried to accomplish, because of their fallen nature and sin, they always made a mistake. So we have to look at some of these very carefully. In any case, human history is the history of God's providence of restoration, which means God's providence of recreation, which also is the providence of resurrection. But this principle of restoration to indemnity explains God's work by which we can be restored back to our original state. And without knowing that, we're stuck because of Satan's dominion and all. So without knowing about the principle of restoration to indemnity, we can never find the true path of life. This is not just a theology or a theory, but this is the path of life that we must go through. We must clearly understand as much as we can about this. Now, these slides are very concentrated with a lot of information, but basically this is showing us that because of the fall, we are down here, and we came to be in a midway position between God and Satan. That is fallen people's situation. And to get us back into the level of a perfected person, God must work to cut Satan's attachments off. If Satan is close to us, we have a problem. And as long as we are in this midway position, we are simply spinning our wheels. So we have to walk a path of restoration, or a path of searching for God, which every religious person does actually. And even Christians are walking that path. They may not even realize it, but by studying Scripture, praying, serving, attending church, they are separating Satan from themselves. And by doing that, they make it appear to this point, top of the growth stage. However, at that critical point, people, unless they understand the principle, have a very difficult time to overcome the temptation which Adam and Eve experienced. Just within this last week, new revelations came out that new powerful individuals got caught up by sexual scandals, and their reputations and positions and so forth are destroyed. But many of us got to that point, and at that point we were able to meet the Messiah. And that means we could understand about the truth, we could receive the blessing, and have our original sin removed. And then we have the path of following the Messiah. That, in some ways, may be the hardest part. That is what we're all involved in to one degree or another. Because of the fall, we are embodiment of good and evil. And as Father sometimes points out, the basis of evil is a perfected, decisive factor already. We are very close with evil. It's very easy to do evil things. We don't need to be educated to do evil. It comes naturally, as it were. The basis of goodness is imperfect, and so without making a conscious effort, deliberate every day, to stimulate the basis of goodness, we oftentimes cannot be very good people. It takes an effort. We have to learn and to practice and overcome mistakes over and over again in order to come to God's side. But in this midway position, the important thing is not what we believe or think, but what we do. Conditions. If you make a condition that is a good condition, then God is justified in pulling you a little closer to Him, and Satan can't argue at all. But if we make a bad condition, lie, cheat, steal, and any number of other sins, then Satan is justified in pulling us closer to his side, and God has his hands tied. It's a very crazy situation, but it means that everything depends upon me. In one sense, even true parents cannot save me. I must save myself. Because I can believe Father, I can listen to what Father says, and I can think about all these wonderful things, and then do nothing. What we do is all decisive. This is one of our biggest struggles. If we make good conditions every day, then we will be going to God's side. If we make evil conditions along the way, then we have a seesaw situation. And that's our life. Back and forth, up and down. We really have to hunduke and nurture ourselves with God's words so that we can understand about goodness, what is good in any situation, what is a good viewpoint, what is a good perspective, what is a good thought, what is a good desire. A couple of weeks ago, Damon was saying that we have to think almost all the time, is this principled or is this not principled? And then we have to act on the principled dimension of it. That's our daily life of faith, almost moment to moment. Because many times, even without being aware of it, we're caught up on the wrong side and we slip. We have to continually advance. So, this is our life of faith. Going through all the conditions that we are doing to separate from Satan, cold showers, attend the lectures, read scriptures, read Father's words, practice good things, and so forth. We are coming back to the top of the growth stage in form. Not in content yet, because we have lots of fallen nature still. But we can get there in form. And at that point, we see the Messiah, and then following, serving, believing, understanding, practicing what the Messiah shows us and tells us, we can gradually reach maturity. That's our life of faith. Most of us are caught in that upper completion stage at one point or another. Some of us are back in the growth stage. I'm sure there are even a few people that might be down in the formation stage. That's our life of faith. Complete salvation is achieved through true parents, because salvation does not come through what we know or what we study or what we memorize, but what we do. And what we do is inspired by Father's love, and without that, we don't know. Why do we receive the blessing to remove original sin? Why should we receive the blessing of the perfection stage of the growth period? Because that's where Adam and Eve fell from. And most of us are in this course of separation from Satan, even after the blessing, seems like, from what David talks about. In short, life is a struggle, and it reflects all of history. History has gone through a long, many years course, but the basis of history is the struggle between God and Satan, between good and evil. Sometimes it takes cultural forms between design theory and evolution, between family and homosexuality, between liberalism and conservatism, all of these different faces. But it all boils down to the fight between God and Satan, or good and evil. And the primary factor in the development of history is you and me. As long as we make strong efforts to do goodness and reject evil, God can use that to advance history. But if people are wishy-washy and a lot of bad things are happening, history kind of stagnates and spins its wheel. We may not be so significant as people, famous, rich, and so on, but because we're searching for goodness and trying to reject evil, this is the main factor that pushes history. Here is a midway position, once again, and in this position, we need to make indemnity conditions. That's most important. Indemnity means when you've lost your original position or status or value, you must make some condition, you must do something to be restored back to it. Making that condition is indemnity. Sometimes it's not so difficult, sometimes it's very difficult. But it's all indemnity. Coming to this OSDP workshop is an indemnity condition. Praying at 5 o'clock in the morning is an indemnity condition. Fasting 7 days is an indemnity condition. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's not that hard. But in any case, as we make these conditions, we are being restored. It's a process of restoring the original position, gradually, little by little, through making such conditions. And the condition of indemnity is anything that you offer to heaven. If you want to pray for 7 days and offer to heaven, that's a condition. If you were to jump down and walk up to the tree of blessing, that's a condition. If you walk on the right side, that's a condition that you can offer in heaven. You can make up many conditions. You can pray and offer what you're doing to God and ask Him to accept it, and usually He will accept it, and that's a good condition. But there are very specific conditions that we have to make in history, which we'll look at in a moment. But applying this to history, the providence of restoration through indemnity is the history of important people making indemnity conditions that God has asked them to make. That is what has moved history. So God's work to restore us back is the history of Him asking us to do something and our responsibly doing whatever He has asked. But because of sin, sometimes people make mistakes. Now, this is very similar to Christianity. They have a dispensationalist view of history, which is very similar, although not as concretely detailed as we have here. So if you believe principle, and you stay at home and sit and do nothing but pray, that's not terrible, but it's not restoring much. And it's not really helping you to find God so much. Especially, we need to do things and act. Sometimes easy, sometimes not so easy. There are different types of conditions of indemnity. Equal indemnity, lesser, and greater. And you're all familiar with these. They give faiths from Catholicism and Holy Communion and so forth. The thing is, you see all three types manifest in history. And we'll point those out in context. How should we make conditions of indemnity? Here's the key point. To reverse the process of the problem. If you've told a lie, you have to go back and admit and confess and go the reverse course. Not easy, but not impossible either. You see this many times in history. Adam turned his back on God, so on the cross, Jesus had to have faith even when God turned his back on him. And a key point here is do not blame God. Don't blame anyone. We must take responsibility for my salvation, and nobody makes you sin. Nobody makes you fail your responsibility. That's all up to you. So reversing the course And who should do that? God can't, Satan won't, we must. But in our experience, we have almost never been able to accomplish our responsibility that Father has asked us to do. Do Tongpa and Kyokpa, we couldn't do it. Do home church, we couldn't do it. Witness to people, we couldn't do it. Therefore, Father himself has made up the difference. Father's under a lot of pressure because God requires certain things, and Father's on a timetable, and he's absolutely committed to fulfilling God's will. So when Father tells us God's heart that we need to do this and we don't do it, Father can't go back to God and say, well, I'm sorry I couldn't do it. Sorry about that. Father must pay indemnity himself to make up the difference, and then he can offer that to God. That way Satan has no accusation. Over and over in history, that's the most serious thing, is when Satan can accuse or attack or invade. As long as you can keep Satan out, then you're okay. And Father has been able to do that his whole life. Now, what indemnity conditions should we fallen people make? For that, we have to go back and look at the family of Adam and Eve. That was the first family, and in that family we can see what Adam and Eve should have done, what they didn't do, and therefore what we must do. We must fix the mistakes. In Adam's family, there must be a foundation of substance and a foundation of faith. Adam failed to keep God's word, and then we must keep God's word. Adam and Eve failed. We must restore that failure. And we will look at this in more detail here in a moment. The foundation of substance involves the indemnity condition to remove the fallen nature, when two people must relate. As you know, Satan dominated Eve and dominated Adam, and instead of having them dominate him, he reversed it. So we have to reverse that. Right now, we have the fallen nature of envy, jealousy, impetuosity. Do you know what that means? Arrogance and obstinacy. These are the kinds of things that Damon talks about all the time. She adds a few more there, but this is sufficient. Instead of envying or having jealousy towards someone, we must love. Instead of acting arrogantly, we must find a mediator. Instead of being arrogant, we must submit to someone. Instead of being obstinate, we must multiply goodness and not be stubborn. These are very indicative of the kinds of problems that you found in Adam's family after the fall. Now, foundation of the Messiah is a very interesting concept. With this, you can understand all of human history. Historians, as I said, could never really understand history, but this is an amazing concept. The hope of history is to receive the Messiah, and for that we need to lay a foundation of faith and a foundation of substance. Usually, the central figure for the foundation of faith is the Father, making a symbolic offering for a certain time period. And the foundation of substance usually involves the second son in the able position, and the condition is to remove the fallen nature. Adam's family was a long time ago, perhaps as much as 10,000 years or more. And you won't find them in the history books. But the significant thing about Adam's family is that is where, I think I mentioned this last week, you find the creation, the fall, and the restoration all wrapped up into oneness. And the same spiritual dynamics that you find in Adam's family, you will find replayed all through history in a very thematic and continuous and consistent manner. And especially when we come down to looking at today, our modern history, it's amazing because it is the same pattern that you find in Adam's family. So it's very important to study Adam's family from that perspective. Now this shows dispensationalism. From fallen Adam all the way to the second coming, you have these dispensations of 2,000 years. And these are quite Christian in structure, but the content is quite different. We don't have time for the detail, but in terms of God's Word, you have the foundation, Old, New, and Completed Testament ages. In terms of resurrection, you have the foundation and then formation, growth, and completion stage resurrection. And there are other points to be made. But each stage of history has its particular content. And this slide shows how important I am. Not I, me, I, but I, us, I. And it's really true if you think about it. Damon says we're the crystallization of all our ancestors, but we're also the fruit of history. And who is going to fulfill the purpose of history today? When you study the divine principle, you realize that all of history is pointing to one particular point, when the Messiah comes to restore the world. And there's been a lot of effort in history to bring that about. And we can't pass the buck on this one. Not only am I the fruit of my ancestors, but I'm also the fruit of history itself. Damon sometimes has said, we have Adam's blood flowing in my veins. So we go all the way back. So I have the weight of history on my shoulders, and therefore I am responsible to accomplish the purpose of history. If we really feel that deeply, then it's quite a serious responsibility. We can't wait until the second generation or the third generation. I have to do it myself, because if nobody does it now, it doesn't get done. One purpose of the OSDP lectures, as we saw, was to understand the heart of God and to feel how much God trusts and needs us. And if we take this providence of restoration as a personal thing, as Father and David both have said, God doesn't own this, Father doesn't own this, we own it, or at least we should own this. I have to think of this as my own providence of restoration through indemnity. I must restore the world. I must feel that kind of responsibility. Of course, I can't do that, but we can be tribal messiahs. And that Father has said very clearly, we must have that capacity. If we can restore our tribes, then God will afford us as doing what Father has done. So we must be very, very serious in studying this principle of restoration through indemnity. And by doing so, we can fulfill the purpose of history, and all future generations can praise us. That's not why we're doing it. We're doing it to relieve God's sorrow. But Father has told us that all the spiritual world will rejoice once we achieve a victory. And that means make good families and witness, attend Foundation Day, become mature people. That's basically all we can do. If we can bring all our relatives and our tribe and our cousins, brothers and sisters home, we've done a lot. But nobody can do that but me. Okay. Now we all know about Father's 64 stages. Because of the fall and because of Christianity rejection in 1945, Father had to restore all 8 stages vertically and horizontally. And out on the hallway you can see charts showing some of these things. History will have to bring a lot of this detail out as we study. But these are the 8 stages vertically, and these are the 8 stages horizontally, which Father has gone through, and which we all, in some measure, must go through also. But we don't understand these so well, and that is why we have to study in depth. Okay, I'm a little bit behind schedule, but I'm sorry for my voice. It's a little bit crackly this morning. Can you understand me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. Those are some of the principles of restoration. And now we're going to go to actual history and see how they apply in these families. And again, Adam's family is important because that's the origin and everything is there. So if you understand what happens there, you have a sense of all of history. It says that God began His providence right after the fall of Adam. I don't know if that's the case or not. As I mentioned last week, I believe that God was so shocked and so stunned that he couldn't do anything for, I don't know, some period of time before he could actually feel like starting it again. Dr. Otomo from Japan, who sees this psychologically, he says this, and it seems very realistic. When you have such a horrible shock from the fall that God experienced, God would maybe be stunned for a while, a week, century, I don't know. But in any case, God began with Adam's family, and therefore we can find in Adam's family everything. In Adam's family, you would expect the central figure to be Adam and some symbolic offering for a certain time period, and then the sons work out the indemnity condition to remove the fallen nature. But the Bible does not say that Adam offered an offering. Instead, Abel offered the offering. And the reason for that is because Adam is the one who hurt God's heart. He was a real mix of good and evil. God could not use him because Satan was close to him, and therefore that's not the best situation. So Abel is the one who made the offering. God had to symbolically divide Adam into good and evil, which means Abel and Cain. Abel represented Cain represented the first fall of Eve, which was more evil. Abel the second fall, which was less evil, and that is why Abel is in the central figure position. And then having separated those two sons, each of which are in a position, Abel is in a position to represent goodness and relate with God. Cain represents evil, bless his heart, and is in a position to represent and to relate with Satan. God forbid. From these different positions, then, they work out their fallen nature. And for this, Cain must love Abel, mediate to Abel, submit to Abel, and multiply goodness through Abel. Again, Adam could not be the central figure because of these reasons. And so God divided Adam into Abel and Cain. Here is the Eve with the unprincipled partner, with the principal partner. That's why the two sons are decided as they are. And when you look at Cain and Abel, Cain offered his offering, God refused it. Abel offered his offering, God accepted it. Because they're in these positions. Abel's happy, God accepted his offering. But God rejected Cain. And sometimes God rejects what we offer, and we don't understand that. And that's because we have to work out this relationship too. Cain is in the position of archangel. And in the original fall, the archangel dominated Adam and didn't love Adam and all of those other situations. Cain must overcome those things. Now, psychologically, you have to think that's very difficult. Cain was just rejected. That hurts. I wouldn't say he's resentful, but he doesn't understand. And when he sees Abel so happy and excited, then maybe his resentment starts. Cain probably did not kill Abel right away. I like what Dr. Otomo says. In this first family, Adam and Eve are fighting each other and accusing each other. You didn't do what God was, and it's your fault. Just like couples struggle today. Cain is the oldest son. Abel is the youngest son. Maybe for fair, close to his parents' heart. They love him more. They talk to him more. Cain is off on the sidelines, resentful. And he probably forms in his mind a way to take revenge over his brother. His brother was received by God. His brother is close to his parents. Cain has all kinds of resentment. So he may have chosen the time when Abel's not looking, gets a rock, bashes him on the head. Whatever realistically happened, I don't know, but you can really imagine this. in a dysfunctional family. So instead of loving Abel, Cain murdered Abel. Now, in every human relationship today, it is a Cain and Abel situation, even in the outside world. And you can see this problem terribly. Father says the knot of Cain and Abel has been tightened ever tighter throughout history. Nobody knows how to untie that. People, arrogance, envy, jealousy, one-upmanship, backbiting, gossiping. Terrible things happen in the social world when people try to destroy each other. Nobody wants to submit and to love and to serve and to support. That's why this has been such a terrible problem. And indeed, Cain, instead of making the condition to overcome his fallen nature, simply solidified it, multiplied it, crystallized it, and so forth. The reason God could accept Abel's offering is because Abel is in the right position, and a couple of things from Abel's offering. God is showing us that anybody can make an offering acceptable to God if he satisfies the necessary conditions. What are those conditions? Well, even in the case of fallen people, when they satisfy the necessary conditions, God accepts that person. He must make a requisite indemnity condition. What are those conditions? Usually to find a higher central person, one who is closer to God, and then follow that person, obey that person, submit to that person, love that person, be willing to accept that person's guidance. When we're given a central figure or a church director or regional leader or whatever, sometimes we don't like that person's character, personality, eccentricity, manner, etc. And it's hard for us. But every time you meet somebody, you're either higher or lower. And if you're lower, you've got to make this condition going through that person, even if we don't like that person. Do you know how, of course you know how hard that is to do. In our church, it's happening all the time. We shoot central figures down. I do it. I know you do it. This is repeating this over and over again. Damon says, always be humble, always love people. That way we never make a mistake. If I have a connection with Satan, which we all do, in order to come back to God's side, I must make a condition. I must do something. I must submit, love, be humble, etc., etc. There is no reason in any context to be arrogant, proudful, resentful, stubborn, and so forth. It just... In the province of restoration and indemnity, we cannot think, feel, and act as we want to. Even that's what my nature tells me. That's my fallen nature. To take out our fallen nature, no matter what the situation, we have to be humble, love, serve, mediate, and so on. That's not easy. So, Abel made the foundation of faith, but Cain was not able to lay the foundation of substance, because Cain murdered Abel. So the foundation of the Messiah was not established. The providence was prolonged. God chose Seth to replace Abel and commenced it. But this shows us other important things. In history, God always gets hit first. If somebody strikes first, that's not God. Because God always gets hit, and then after that takes back what has been lost. A very interesting criteria. The person who initiates it, or who screams first, or who complains first, or who attacks first, that is not the godly sign. So sometimes it is best just to be quiet and humble and observant and study and ask what is principled, what is not principled. If a church director gives a crazy direction I don't like, just shut up, watch what happens, do your best, think what is principled, what is not principled. So far, evil has dominated over goodness. We are the first people in history who can turn that around. and deliberately make goodness prevail over evil. It's very hard, but that's what we have to do. So the sins in Adam's family are the origin of the sins of humanity. All the things that you find in Adam's dysfunctional family, disbelief, treachery, adultery, murder, even from the archangel, lying, larceny, all of these sins are the sins of humanity. And it's very scary when you look at this, because right now, today, so many bad things are coming out in the news and so forth. It's all right there in Adam's family. It shows you how dysfunctional that family became once it disconnected from God. And it's interesting, the first 5 commandments of the 10 commandments are really here. Right out of Adam's family. To reverse the problems. The second 5 of the 10 commandments are common to all religions. So those 10 commandments are very good rules to follow. And it's interesting that in America now, they're trying to take those 10 commandments down, out of schools, out of courtrooms, and so forth. You could really see Satan working. More lessons about Adam's family. God does not interfere with your responsibility. When you meet somebody that you don't like, it is your responsibility to be humble. Your responsibility to serve that person. Even in the business world, they say, if your boss is a jerk, instead of destroying him, make up for his mistakes so that you elevate him, and then you are both elevated. Even in the business world, that is recognized. Because that is a principled thing to do. When it comes down to it, God cannot save me. I have to do certain things to come to God. God can't interfere with that. And God's predestination is absolute. Even though Cain killed Abel, God could still raise Seth. Why? Because Abel's faithful heart to heaven. And then Seth comes in. And from Seth's descendants, Noah. From Abel, we note, there is no reason whatsoever ever to be arrogant. Be modest, obedient, just keep your mouth shut. They say in the Orient, people always know how wise a person is. You know, he sits there, not saying anything, just observing. Very wise person. Until he opens his mouth. And then they can see how foolish people are. Because what we say is usually stupid. But if you want to see wise, just shut up and let people think what you're thinking. Don't boast. Do be self-sacrificing. Never worry about sacrifice. It will never be lost. Abel's responsibility, he should love Cain. He should have passed on and practiced God's love. He should have brought Cain to voluntary submission. We are all Abel. And we are in a sinless situation, close to God. Those people out there are Cain. We have to go to them and serve them, and embrace them, be spit upon by them, and still love them. Little by little, their hearts will be melted. That is the only way to submit, to get Cain to submit. If you strike them, if you get revenge, if you take them to court, if you gossip about them, it doesn't solve it. The only way. And it's difficult, but to bring Cain to voluntary submission is to love. In Cain's case, we sometimes want to murder someone. That doesn't mean with a gun. It means with our words, with our gossip, even with my attitude. This church would be great if it wasn't for that Mr. Kim. We have all thought that. Believe me. And even in our thoughts, our words, our feelings towards somebody, we kill them. And all it takes is one misplaced word to really hurt somebody's heart, which is one of the problems that we have. So don't be discontent. Don't feel less loved. Everybody has a different fortune. Everybody has a different course. God might be putting you in a situation right now that makes it difficult. But that doesn't mean God doesn't love you. It means you're supposed to overcome something. And when you successfully overcome that, God's right there leading you to a higher place. So don't be discontent, don't complain about anything. As David says, be grateful about anything, because there might be some purpose behind it. Killing Abel might vent your anger for an instant, but it will be miserable in eternity. In Korean culture, they have a proverb: don't make an enemy, because you might meet on a one-way street. It's very true. If you're mean to somebody today, their child might meet your child next week. Or your grandchild might be with their grandchild. At some point, that mistake has to be dealt with and faced. So it's better just not to make any enemies. Killing Abel is not a good idea. You might feel, but you will never make it to the kingdom. One is hell-bound when one murders someone. If you hurt somebody's heart, remember the 3 heavenly principles. Don't fall, keep your purity, don't hurt people's feelings, and don't misuse public funds. 3 major things. If you hurt somebody, you're not going to go to heaven. You're going to end up in hell, because that's a huge problem. Cain should have submitted to Abel. He should have controlled himself with patience. So again, when you're faced with a difficult situation, just keep your mouth shut, tolerate, forbear, be patient, and see what happens. Pray hard. A lot of things to learn from Cain and Abel. The law of Cain and Abel: love God, because only God can relate with Abel. Abel is Cain's path to heaven. Without Abel, Cain is stuck. So we have to. Abel has to love God, and Abel has to love Cain. Without loving Cain, Cain is stuck. These people in this world aren't just going through life and maybe end up in paradise. They are all going to hell. And we are the only ones that can bring them to heaven. Cain does not have a heart of true love. Cain wants to kill, hate, gossip, be prejudiced, be resentful, murder, take to court, destroy, complain, overcome, get revenge. This is the Cain mentality. If you read Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, you can hear all of these resentments coming out in his book. He hates everything religious. Somewhere along the line, he must have had a very bad experience. This is Cain's heart. So he has to be taught about heart. There's no book that can do that. But I can do that. If I meet Cain, through my love and my compassion and my patience, I can teach him slowly how love is all about. And by loving our enemy, we can melt their hearts. The path to heaven: Abel should not be self-centered. I need to think most about Cain's feelings. When David says witness, just do witnessing. Well, we're concerned about my salary, my schedule, my family, my time, my tiredness, etc., etc., etc. We forget about Cain. But Cain is suffering, and the good person walks the path of sacrifice to save that suffering, evil, delusional person. Cain can only go to heaven through Abel. Those people out there are stuck. So Cain should sever his relation with Satan, but how can he do that unless he's taught and shown and embraced? Whose words should he accept, Satan's or mine? In order to accept my words, he must really come to trust me, and he can't trust me unless I really embrace him and know his heart. You might say that Abel is the root and Cain is the soil. These are all things that we learn from Adam's family. And you'll see these same principles carried on through history. But let's go on. Let's take a short break, and we will start with Noah. So far, basically on schedule. Very good job.
5-minute break, sorry. We started 30 minutes late. So 5-minute break.